Welcome to the deep dive. Today we're tackling a really bizarre mystery, something that's fascinated people for ages. Spontaneous human combustion.
Right, SHC.
Exactly. And you're here because you want to get informed fast and you love those, surprising facts. Well, get ready.
Because this is definitely surprising stuff.
This deep dive is all about whether a person can actually just burst into flames. With no lighter fluid, no dropped match, nothing obvious.
Yeah, it sounds like science fiction, doesn't it?
It really does. We've looked at, well, everything. Old historical accounts, modern science papers, news reports, the works.
Trying to get a full picture. So our mission today, explore it all. We'll hit those really strange old stories, look at what science thinks.
Including some of the, let's say, less conventional ideas.
Oh, yeah. And really try to get to the bottom of it. Is spontaneous human combustion a real thing?
Let's dive in. So these early stories are just wild.
They really are.
Think back to 1663. There's this physician, Thomas Bartholin. He wrote about a woman in Paris who apparently just went up in ashes and smoke. But get this, the straw mattress she was lying on, totally fine, untouched.
Wow. Okay, that's specific.
Yeah.
And weird.
Right. Then a few years later, 1673, another guy, Jonas DuPont, he actually collected a bunch of similar cases.
So it wasn't just a one-off story even back then. People were noticing this pattern.
Seems like it. And these early accounts, they sort of set the template for what people reported later on.
And as more stories came out, these really consistent and frankly, pretty creepy details kept popping up.
Like what?
Well, like the victim being almost completely turned to ash, usually happen indoors.
Okay.
But the room itself, often hardly damaged by fire. Like minimal damage, sometimes just a greasy soot.
As if the fire was incredibly focused, right?
Exactly. And maybe the strangest detail that keeps coming up, the hands and feet, often found intact.
Ugh. Yeah, that is unsettling. It paints a very peculiar picture.
Definitely.
Okay, let's make this more concrete. Talk about specific cases. Dr. J. Irving Bentley in 1966. That one's pretty famous.
Right, the Pennsylvania doctor.
Yeah. Found partially burned. Really, just a leg and foot were left, mostly. But the scene, a huge hole burned right through the bathroom floor. Vinyl floor, wooden beams underneath, gone. Ashes down in the basement.
Intense heat then, but localized.
Extremely localized. His walker, standing right there next to the blackened tub. His robe burned nearby. The rest of the house, pretty much okay.
See, that's the kind of detail that makes you go, that intense contained burning.
Exactly. Then there's Mary Reeser, 1951, in Florida.
Another classic case, often cited.
Found as, well, mostly ashes. A greasy spot on the floor. One foot, still in its slipper, was left. And her skull, which had apparently shrunk.
Shrunk. Seriously.
Yeah, reportedly. And again, the apartment, very little fire damage beyond where she'd been sitting.
And did they mention she was a smoker?
Wow.
And took sleeping pills?
They did, which, might be relevant. We'll
Okay.
circle back to that.
Okay.
What about Jeannie Saffin, 1982, in London?
Right. The eyewitness account for that one is striking.
Her father-in-law apparently saw it. Her upper body just suddenly caught fire while she was sitting in a simple wooden chair.
And the chair itself.
Barely scorched, reportedly. Completely usable. The stove was off. No other fire source obvious in the room.
Again, the person burns, but the immediate surroundings don't really catch. It defies typical fire behavior.
It really does. And even more recently, Michael Faraday in Ireland, 2010.
Ah, yes. The coroner's verdict on that one caused a stir.
Because the coroner actually put spontaneous human combustion as the cause of death, officially.
Which is highly unusual in a modern context. Now, there were burn marks on the ceiling above him and the floor below.
Right, so some spread.
Some, but again, the rest of the house was fine. So even with that official verdict, the pattern of localized burning fits.
It's fascinating how consistent some elements are. And this isn't new. I read about an old book, 1823, mentioned in the British Medical Journal.
Okay, what did it say back then?
It noted similar things. Alleged victims often being heavy drinkers, usually older women. The idea that maybe a small flame, like from a pipe or candle, did make contact first.
So suggesting an external spark even then.
Kind of. But it also mentioned hands and feet sometimes falling off, minimal damage around them, and this greasy, smelly ash.
Huh. And the link to alcoholism was noted way back then, too.
Yeah, that seems to be a recurring theme in the older literature, definitely.
Okay, so we've got these really compelling, maybe disturbing stories, patterns emerging over centuries. But science, How does science grapple with this? Because, let's be honest, people don't just ignite, right?
Well, yeah, that's the million-dollar question. And the scientific consensus is pretty straightforward,
Which is?
that most, if not all, of these so-called SHC cases probably involve an external ignition source that was just missed, overlooked.
Okay, makes sense. Fires need fuel, oxygen, and ignition.
Exactly. You need to reach ignition temperature. You need trapped heat. You need oxygen. Can the living human body just generate all that internally to cause this kind of inferno? That's the core scientific question.
And based on what we know about biology and physics, probably not.
Highly unlikely seems to be the verdict. We're mostly water, after all, not exactly flammable.
So if it's not spontaneous combustion from within, what's the leading scientific explanation for these weird scenes?
That would be the wick effect.
Ah, the candle theory.
Basically, yeah. Think of a candle wick, wax fuel. The theory here is a small external flame, maybe a dropped cigarette, like perhaps with Mary Reeser.
Right, who's a smoker?
Ignites the person's clothing. That initial fire starts to melt the person's body fat.
Which is flammable, unlike water.
Right. The melted fat then soaks into the clothing, acting like a wick in a candle. The fat becomes the fuel source.
And that allows for a slow, steady, but very hot burn that consumes the fatty parts of the body.
Exactly. It burns intensely, but doesn't necessarily spread rapidly outwards like a typical house fire, especially if a person is relatively still. It consumes the fuel, the body fat, leaving the surroundings less damaged than you'd expect.
That actually makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
It explains the intense consumption of the body and the localized damage.
And remember that experiment by John DeHaan, the forensic scientist?
Vaguely, with an animal carcass?
Yes, he used a pig carcass. Pigs have a fat distribution somewhat similar to humans, wrapped it in a blanket, and lit the blanket with a small flame.
And what happened?
The results were pretty striking. The pig fat melted, soaked the blanket, and fueled a long, slow burn that reduced a lot of the carcass to ash. Minimal damage to the surroundings.
Okay, wow. And did it replicate any other SHC details?
Yes. The feet. Even in this experiment, the pig's feet were largely intact.
Just like in the Bentley case and others, because feet have less fat.
Precisely. Less fat content means less fuel in those areas, so extremities like hands and feet might not get consumed completely.
And the greasy residue often reported.
Likely just the rendered fat, the byproducts of burning fatty tissue. So the wick effect, combined with an initially overlooked spark, seems to explain a lot of the strangeness.
It covers the main points. Intense burning, localized damage, surviving extremities, greasy residue. Seems plausible.
Much more plausible than some alternatives. What about those other ideas, like methane gas building up in your gut?
Yes, the intestinal gas theory.
Oh.
Well, the simple counter-argument is usually cows.
Cows.
Cows produce way more methane than humans. If intestinal methane could cause spontaneous combustion, well, we'd expect to see exploding cows, wouldn't we?
Okay, fair point. We don't see spontaneous bovine combustion making headlines.
Exactly, so that one seems pretty unlikely. Same goes for things like static electricity buildup or weird geomagnetic forces causing ignition.
No evidence.
No real scientific evidence to support them as a cause for this kind of event. And then there's Larry Arnold's idea, the pyroton.
Oh, right, some kind of new subatomic particle.
Yeah, supposedly generated within the body's cells that causes combustion. Well, let's just say there's zero scientific proof this particle even exists. It's firmly in the realm of pseudoscience.
Got it. So no pyrotons. What about ketosis? Brian J. Ford's idea.
That's another theory proposing a natural mechanism. Ketosis is a metabolic state where the body produces ketones, including acetone, which is flammable.
Okay.
Ford suggested maybe, in rare cases, acetone could build up to flammable levels and somehow ignite. But again, concentrations needed inside a living body to just spontaneously ignite are thought to be incredibly high. Scientifically improbable for it to happen spontaneously like that.
Right. So science points pretty strongly towards the wick effect and external ignition. Okay. Still, some of those old cases with limited info, they still feel a bit mysterious, don't they?
They do. And that's part of why this whole idea persists. Even with a strong explanation like the wick effect, the sheer drama of the descriptions, especially from times with less rigorous investigation, it leaves room for doubt and fascination.
Plus, it's such a potent image. It really captured the public imagination, didn't it? I mean, Charles Dickens used it.
Absolutely. In Bleak House, he has the character Crook die from spontaneous combustion. That definitely helps cement the idea in popular culture.
Made it feel like a real, albeit terrifying, possibility.
For sure. Literature and later movies have kept the idea alive. It's a naturally dramatic and morbidly fascinating concept.
Which probably explains why you still hear paranormal ideas floated, right? Like psychic energy gone haywire or some unknown biological process.
Exactly. When something seems that strange, and maybe the conventional explanation feels a bit mundane, even if it's scientifically sound, people
Hmm.
might look for more extraordinary causes.
Though we should always approach those with critical thinking, obviously.
Absolutely. Skepticism is key. But you can see why the mystery endures. These are rare events, often happening to isolated individuals, and historically, the investigations weren't what they are today. Scientifically studying something so rare and sensational is just inherently difficult.
And didn't that investigation by Nickel and Fisher find something important about the circumstances?
Yes, Joe Nickel and John Fisher. They looked into many alleged SHC cases and found a strong correlation.
Yeah, which was?
The victims were often near plausible ignition sources, fireplaces, candles, lamps, smoking materials. And importantly, the victims were often incapacitated in some way,
How so?
maybe due to intoxication, old age, illness, poor mobility, things that would make them less likely to react quickly to a small fire starting on their clothing, allowing the wick effect to take hold.
Ah, okay. So that suggests maybe those external ignition sources weren't just plausible but likely, and the victim's condition played a key role in things escalating so dramatically.
Precisely. Their work really reinforces the idea that we need to look carefully at all the mundane factors before jumping to spontaneous.
Okay, so wrapping this up, we've got these incredible, unsettling historical stories. They sound almost supernatural.
Yeah, the descriptions are powerful.
But then science steps in, offers the wick effect explanation, which accounts for many of the bizarre details, the ashes, the localized damage, the surviving feet.
Often linked to an overlooked external spark, and perhaps the victim's inability to respond quickly.
So that central question, can a human truly spontaneously combust, ignite from within, with absolutely no outside help?
From a scientific perspective, the evidence just isn't there. The wick effect provides a much better supported explanation for the observed phenomena.
Right, so the mystery remains more in the historical accounts in our imagination than in known physics or biology.
Seems that way.
Which leads to a final thought for you to ponder. We have amazing forensic science now. We understand fire dynamics so much better. So why do these tales of inexplicable burning still grab us so strongly? What is it about these fiery deaths, especially the historical ones where evidence is sparse, that keeps that spark of mystery alive, even when science offers a likely answer? Maybe future texts, future analysis could re-examine some of these old cases and tell us even more.
It's definitely something to think about. The power of a strange story versus scientific explanation.